Welcome to the Electricity of Life, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. In the first part of this presentation, our guest Mark Gober began an exploration of the unresolved scientific puzzle. How and why does consciousness exist? In Mark's book, An End to Upside-Down Thinking, he summarizes some of the voluminous scientific evidence which suggests that consciousness is not generated by, nor confined to the brain. A major focus of this evidential summary is the amazing abundance of scientific studies, dating back more than half a century, into psychic phenomena, such as telepathy, ESP, and precognition. In fact, countless scientific papers published in peer-reviewed journals have and continue to report positive results in the study of psychic abilities. A parallel field of investigation is survival of consciousness, that is, the study of near-death experiences, and even purported communications with the dead by so-called mediums. While the Thunderbolts Project takes no position on these issues, in the past, we have presented for your consideration interviews and public presentations by such noted scientists as Dr. Rupert Sheldrake and Dr. Dean Radian, both of whose scientific research into consciousness Mark outlines in his book. Today, Mark offers a brief yet comprehensive overview of the compelling evidence that the locus and source of consciousness is non-material.
There are a number of other phenomena that are really counterintuitive that I came across in my studies. The majority of my book, An End to Upside-Down Thinking, is devoted to looking at these phenomena, and here I'll briefly touch on a few, just because of limited time. There are two broad categories that I talk about, and for each one I show the best scientific evidence that exists today. One area is psychic phenomena, so things like telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, remote viewing, which is the ability to perceive something without being there to see it with your eyes. It's like being able to see it with your mind. And I was shocked to learn that the US government actually ran a program on this for more than 20 years. And some of their own documents that have been released by the CIA, they're declassified. And as I was doing my research, I was able to download the documents and include them in my book. I'll read you some of the quotes from these declassified documents. One is, remote viewing is a real phenomenon. So that's a direct quote. So for me as a researcher, that was a pretty compelling thing to see, that the internal documents explicitly stated that this is a real thing. The document then shows a scientific panel that examined these phenomena and had some credible people, including a scientist from Caltech. And the next slide shows what they found. And what they said is the implications are revolutionary, and the evidence is too impressive to dismiss as mere coincidence. So again, this is the US government using essentially psychic spies to remote view distant places using the mind alone. It's really a remarkable thing. But if we view consciousness as being the basis of our reality, if we view consciousness as being beyond all space and time, then these sorts of phenomena are actually possible. Another phenomenon is known as precognition that I talk about, where we can know the future before it happens. And in some studies, the body is actually reacting to something that is shown before the person consciously even knows that something will be shown. Sometimes it even happens at a subconscious level. But again, it conforms with this notion that consciousness is beyond space and time. It's like consciousness can somehow almost reach in the future at certain points to know things before they happen. And certainly there are many anecdotes of people who claim they have known about things or have dreamt things before they happened. And now science is starting to show some empirical results, at least statistically, that point in this direction as well. There's another chapter on animals that have similar abilities, and Dr. Rupert Sheldrake has been the lead scientist to look in this area. But like many other areas of study in this general domain, it's been very difficult to attract funding. So there haven't been quite so many studies on animals, but I think there is some preliminary research that is worth looking at. Another phenomenon within the psychic realm is known as psychokinesis, which is the ability for the mind to have an effect on physical matter. This is sort of like the experiment we talked about with the observer effect in quantum physics, but it's also found to be true on other levels. And one example I can give quickly is from Princeton University, which blows my mind personally because I went to school there and I had no idea about these studies. The former dean of engineering, Dr. Robert John, ran studies with machines that are called random number generators. So these are machines that spit out a 0 and a 1 in a random fashion. So when you look at the string of zeros and ones that the machine has generated over a long stretch, it's about 50% ones and 50% zeros. That's what you'd expect. It's totally random. Now, what Dr. Robert John and his associates did was asked people, these are ordinary people, to put their mental attention to the machine to try to will it to produce more ones than zeros. Now, you think that there shouldn't be any effect, because how in the world could someone's mind affect a machine that's randomly generating numbers? What the experimenters found, however, is that when people mentally focus on the machine to try to make it produce more ones than zeros, there seems to be a very slight effect where the machine does, in fact, produce more ones than zeros, but it requires statistics to show that effect. So it's very small, but highly statistically significant. Again, it's an anomaly that is not well explained by the conventional view of consciousness, but if consciousness is primary, then we can explain things like this. So what I just went through are examples of psychic phenomena. The next general category that I discuss in the book is the notion that consciousness survives bodily death. Now, from the conventional perspective of consciousness, that it's produced by the brain, survival of bodily death makes absolutely no sense. But again, if consciousness is more primary than even our own biology, then sure. Why couldn't consciousness survive? Because it was never dependent on the body in the first place. Now, this reminds me of an important analogy that I think might help here. It's from, again, Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, who says, imagine that reality is like a stream of water, where water represents consciousness. Each of us is like a whirlpool within that broader stream, meaning we're having our own localized, individuated experiences, but we're fundamentally connected as part of the same stream of water or same stream of consciousness. Now, what happens if that whirlpool dissolves into the broader stream? In other words, what happens when the person's physical body dies? The water hasn't left the stream. The water just transitions into a new form, but stays in the stream. So that would sort of be like when someone's physical body dies, their consciousness just transitions into a new dimension or a new state. And at least conceptually, that's what this model would predict. Now, is there any evidence for that? That's what I spent several chapters on. One phenomenon is known as the near-death experience. This is, to me, a very critical area of study that I think deserves much more attention. There have been some great scientists, such as Dr. Pim van Lommel, who's a cardiologist, who's looking at this. Also, Dr. Bruce Grayson from the University of Virginia. This area is attracting more credible research, and for good reason, I think. These are instances where people have impaired brain function, or in some cases, no brain function at all. In other words, these are people who are clinically dead, like they're in cardiac arrest, their heart has stopped, and there's no blood flowing to the brain. There have been studies on people who are in cardiac arrest and have been resuscitated. And what the researchers find is that a number of them come back reporting lucid experiences during that time that their brain was technically off. Now, it's very difficult to explain things like this from a conventional perspective, which would say that we need a functional brain or a highly functional brain to produce a vivid experience. And yet in these cases, people are having vivid experiences when their brain is either highly impaired or it's fully off. Now, in the most compelling cases, there are what's known as a veridical out-of-body experience, meaning that the person in this near-death experience, when they're clinically dead, they find themselves hovering over their body, and they then see things in the room or hear things that happened in the room. When they are later resuscitated, they are able to describe to people what happened during their near-death experience, and what they're reporting is accurate. Now, if the near-death experience were just a hallucination caused by a dying brain, then we wouldn't expect people to come up with accurate descriptions. We would expect hallucinations. And yet what people are describing in many cases are non-hallucinatory. It's a very interesting topic, which is suggesting that maybe our consciousness can exist independently of a functioning body. Totally mind-blowing. Another area is communications with the deceased. Now, if we think of this broader stream of consciousness again, when the whirlpool dissolves into the broader stream, it would in theory be possible for one whirlpool to access the former consciousness of a person, but because that water is just still somewhere else in the stream. It's just a matter of accessing it. There is some emerging science in this area. The Windbridge Research Center is probably the leading organization in this area. They've run 2 studies that have made it into peer-reviewed journals, and they use 5 levels of blinding. So the person who's the medium and is supposed to be communicating with the dead person is speaking to the experimenter over the phone, and all the medium knows or is told is the first name of the deceased person. And what the studies show is that this medium, or the mediums used in the studies, are able to get non-chance information. In other words, they're able to get more information beyond what chance would predict, which suggests, again, that something is happening here, and it's an area that deserves investigation, and suggests that maybe the consciousness of a person who used to be living continues beyond their body. Now, the last area that I look at in this area of surviving bodily death, again, comes from the University of Virginia. I'm referring to more than 50 years of studies at their Division of Perceptual Studies at the medical school, where they've looked at over 2,500 children, usually between the ages of 2 and 5 years old, who are recalling a life that is not theirs. They'll call it a past life. They will start speaking about this person as if it were them, with incredible detail sometimes. And in some cases, the researchers are not able to reason that the child just made it up, because the researchers are able to find medical records or other details that are just very remarkable. But to me, the most compelling cases are ones in which the children have actual birthmarks and physical deformities that match how they described dying in the previous life. Now, those cases, especially where there actually was a person who died in the manner the child described, and where their bodily deformities or birthmarks match that, it's very hard to come up with a conventional explanation there. And the researchers at the University of Virginia have found a number of them. So to me, it's another area that is suggesting maybe the consciousness of a single person can sort of be recycled in this broader stream, where there is almost a transference of information from one life to the next in ways that our current science does not fully appreciate yet. So I've just been through a very, very brief overview of a lot of the science. And what you might be wondering is something that I've wondered a lot, which is, Mark, if there's so much evidence here, how come we didn't know about this? I mean, there's so many smart people out there who are studying science and they're looking at the universe and they're not talking about these things. And here you are, you're a business guy, you're saying that there's all this evidence. How is this not out there more? Now, I have really been shocked in my research to find that many people in the mainstream academic community, certainly not all, but it seems like many, are just not looking at these things at all, because the ideas challenge paradigms, and it would really require a rethinking of all that we know. And to me, the analogy that I think works really well here is the analogy comparing this to what Galileo faced when he was challenging the perspective that the Earth is the center of the solar system. He had all his evidence in the telescope that actually, no, the Earth revolves around the sun. But there were clergymen that didn't want to look in his telescope to see the evidence. I think we have a very similar situation going on right now, where if you talk to some mainstream scientists, again, certainly not all, they might say, well, of course I haven't looked at the studies on these topics because these things are not possible. So why would I spend my time on it? We have to rethink our own identity. And this has been a big shift for me. Materialism would say that our consciousness comes from our physical body. So what's our identity? Our identity is we are a body that has a consciousness, but we're a body first and foremost. This alternative paradigm is saying, wait, no, we are a consciousness first and foremost that's experiencing the physical world through a body. That is a massive shift. And I can just tell you, for me, it's been an adjustment to think about things that way. So this is a shift in identity. The biggest implication of all has to do with the potential interconnectedness of all of us. What if we are part of the same underlying consciousness that is the basis of all reality, but we're having these individual experiences as part of the same stream? So it appears that we're separate, but we're actually entangled within the stream. Dr. Dean Radin, who I mentioned earlier from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, has written a whole book on this topic. It's called Entangled Minds, the notion that our minds that there's a connection there that we're not seeing, and it might explain some of the psychic phenomena like telepathy that we're seeing in the lab. Now, if we're all fundamentally connected as part of the same stream of consciousness, that has big implications for how we might treat one another. Because if we are the same at the level of our consciousness, it becomes irrational, actually, to do harm to someone else. Because why would you harm yourself? If you actually believe that that other person is you at the level of consciousness, it's just not rational to do harm.